My father said I wouldn't be hard enough or tough enough to join the military. Is he going to run or is he going to stand? I broke the world record for running with 40 pounds on my back for the Guinness Book of Records marathon. We get to the gate and the first thing we do is get fireballed. You've got to understand about elite and special forces. And his mate was kicking him as hard as he could in the head. And you went, have you seen this? They locked us in there, the public locked us in, and we had to break out ourselves. And it was like the closest thing I've ever seen to Zulu in my life. I've been stabbed more than once. That's when people come unstuck. And that's why the terrorists hit you at the end. They feel spent, these veterans.
And just before we get going on this video, if I could ask you one small favor and hit that subscribe button, because about 70% of you don't do that. And I'd be really grateful if you did. I spend a lot of time and energy on these videos for over 4 years for my Black Belt Barrister channel, over 10 years for Black Belt Secrets. I'd love to reach 500,000 subscribers and even 1 million subscribers on Black Belt Barrister and many more on Black Belt Secrets. So please do that. I'll be very grateful. And so now let's get into the video. I'm excited to show you. I am the first and only civilian to teach close quarters combat to the military with Polearm Academy. And today I have the great pleasure of bringing you a fascinating and in-depth podcast with military and elite forces veteran Chris, who now heads up Polearm International and is chief instructor of Polearm Academy. We're going to talk about behavioral detection and how you can better protect yourselves and your family when you're out and about, the course that we've set up with Polearm Academy, and of course, many of the things that Chris has learned in his 40-year career in the military and elite forces. So sit tight, this is going to be fascinating. So Chris, a warm welcome. It's great to have you on the channel. For someone that doesn't know what behavioral detection is, how would you describe it to them?
If somebody's trying to hide something because they're criminals or they're terrorists or they're just trying to mislead you, the body goes into a protective screen and is shown by body language, by people crossing things in front of them, the way they talk, the way they communicate, the pitch of voice and everything else there. You've got to remember that only 7% of what we listen to is words. The rest of it sounds and such like. And then when you go to a town, you read the baseline, or police station or railway station, you get the baseline. The baseline is what happens day to day. Now, if something happens in that baseline, somebody's up to no good, the baseline changes, and it's realising how the baseline changes. You can look after your family. And that's what we're trying to teach on behavioural detection.
And so you mentioned baseline there, Chris. For those that don't know, what is a baseline? How do we know what a baseline is?
Well, the baseline is an area predominantly, not a person. People can change the baseline and events can change the baseline. But if you're working for Network Rail, which we've done for a few years, every station is different. It's busiest, quiet, when violence comes into it, when people have been drinking, and the baseline changes. And it's when something, you expect a baseline, say between 10 o'clock and midday in a railway station, is holiday makers. But suddenly somebody comes in there with some ill intent, it reflects on the baseline because people start acting quite a lot differently. They don't know why they're acting differently, but that's what we teach you to spot.
So given that each area has its own baseline, its own norm, if you will, what would you say is one thing that members of the public would ordinarily miss that perhaps they should be looking out for?
That when you work out a baseline, it can happen in seconds. We naturally get a feeling that something's not right, the old hair's gone to the back of your neck, but we don't react on it. We just think we're being silly, where we don't. That is a natural sign. The old fight, flight, or fight syndrome, as it's called. But with the new one, it's called fluffing. It's when people, rather than look at where they are and understand where they are, they prefer to look at their phones, do anything rather than adjust themselves to where they're looking.
Now, you know I've worked together for a number of years now, Chris, including operationally, and we formed Polearm Academy essentially together to teach civilians. What would you tell people about the academy?
Okay, we started Polearm, as you know, Daniel, after we worked with the Army a few years ago, and basically the academy was formed when we had a conversation how we could develop people. We brought Daniel on because he's a martial arts expert and also a legal aspect, which we were dearly lacking in Polearm. We didn't have that knowledge at all. We had people that advised us, but they didn't have the practical knowledge of doing it. And then MOD asked us if we could go down and train the army up pre-deployment for the last deployment in Afghanistan. So Daniel come down, and I think you were shocked, Daniel, at what it was troops were like to teach. The good thing about soldiers, Marines and people like that, they love to get hands-on. So when we were there for 2 weeks teaching them, and we would get them qualified to be trainers inside their own units. And that's the first time we worked together. And we learned an incredible lot of yourself, but the legality of it. Not what's black and white, how it affects your feelings as well. We all done plain, proportionate, necessary and justifiable. We all knew that. But to put it into a practical exercise was really good down there. And that's when we first got together and we decided that Polearm Academy would come out of that, and we formed it together. And now we're running courses around the country, predominantly down in the West Country, for students to come and do like 4 courses. It was 3 originally, but we can't get the detail in. 3 courses where they're actually going live in Bath, doing major exercises, also getting a feeling of what it's like to use firearms properly, not airsoft, to use firearms and understand the implications. And also, when you're using firearms, how useless they can be if you can't justify their use. And that's where close combat really comes into it. And we've designed a program. All our trainers are predominantly ex-elite or special forces that have spent time either teaching the police so they understand the legal side, or our police officers that are taught the military so they understand that. And that's what we've based our polearm training on, Polearm Academy especially.
Now, I've had a lot of my viewers sign up and take part in this course. As civilians doing a military training course, how would you say they are getting on so far, Chris?
Well, we're now on the 3-3 part of the course. There's 3 stages. We have the first selection stage, the second stage is more skilled. And we've completed the final stage, 3-3, which is part 1 and 2, last week in Bath, where we took a group of students, now team members of Polearm, and we took them into Bath to do a behavioural detection exercise to see if they could look after a VIP as a personal escort team and a bodyguard, and have the guys around them doing counter surveillance and seeing if they're being spotted. And it was the most successful exercise that we have had. Actually, it reduced the crime rate in Bath quite seriously.
Now, you mentioned to me off camera that there was one bit about this exercise in Bath that really impressed you. What was it you were doing with the team at that point?
Yeah, we take the guys into the Bath first, and what I do is I give them a guide on how people carry stuff. Like on one exercise we were on, the guy's walking quite strangely, and I said to them, I believe that guy's carrying a blade. And the way he was carrying it and the way he was walking, and when we went to talk to him, he kept checking it, he kept checking his hands to see if they were plainclothes policemen. So there are indicators that can give you that people are hiding stuff from you. Not just emotionally, sometimes it's physical, like blades, and that's something we've got to think about in the country that we're in at the moment.
So given that we had essentially civilian trainees on a live operations scenario to protect a VIP, how would you say they reacted to that?
Well, taking guys in the Bath exercise, it's quite a challenge. I normally took police and military on these sort of exercises. We've taken guys with a real mixture of backgrounds. Some of them were martial artists, some of them never done martial arts, and they saw your channel and they decided to come on the course. The first contact we had with them is an induction where we assess them and we ask them to come back on 2-3 where they go into more detail. And on 2-3 they do a behavioural detection awareness, so you get a presence. On 3-3 they actually do an operators course, and the operators course is we send them live into town to look after a VIP and not to be spotted by surveillance teams going in. So that's quite a challenge for guys who haven't got military background. And they pulled it off magnificently. The authority would not believe they weren't police trained and they weren't military trained. So it shows the right attitude, how you can adapt to your environment. They understood the baseline. And we have 2 things called initial suspicion, when people are acting quite strangely, and elevated. Those are 2 main things. Elevated is predominantly when somebody does something that you can justify your actions. Could be going to talk to the person or you report them to the police. So we had those incidents and we walked away from the exercise as a complete team, but it really shocked me how some people, civilians, with the odd 1 or 2 police and military thrown in, can adapt to those skills.
Of course, training is different from live operations, isn't it? Because we've done live operations together before.
Yes, we were contracted as Polearm International, not Academy, as a live operations. And what we were dealing with is what could have been violent protesters in the middle of London. We had the support from the Metropolitan Police, but we knew that we had to get in there. And the contractor said he wanted some legal expert to be an expert witness. So I asked you, because you've been working with me in the Guards, to come with us. So just to make it easier for everybody, we put a big red vest on you, if you remember. And then we realised, when you said to me, I look like a target, and you were a target. They said that we weren't going to get much harassment. And we were dealing with violence at heights, which is completely different than apprehending people on the ground. What you've got to realise is that when you're climbing, that you lose all your mobility in your hips. So it's all hand-to-hand combat. You can't use sprays as a police officer, because I spent 8 years with the British Transport Police protester removal team and rope team. And with them, they get sprays, handcuffs, but you can't use that when you're climbing at height.
And for the benefit of those watching, the height element was from the trees, because they were literally camping in the trees for weeks on end.
Yep.
They'd built tree houses.
Yep.
They were living in these tree houses, some 30, 40 feet in the air, not just 6 or 12 feet, so higher than a house, some of these trees.
Yeah, the thing you've got to admire about them is we have to go to WATA and all these courses to get us qualified. And we have to do the medical side of when you do suspension trauma and things like that, when you're getting them off. But you're dealing with people that are living in these tree houses for 2 weeks at a time. And we're employed to remove them. But all our training team have to understand to be respectful for those people. If you get less qualified people doing it, it comes unstuck. And I've been on a lot of incidents with other companies where they've come unstuck because they haven't done it. And if you remember, we were told that they didn't know we were coming. We get to the gate, and the first thing we do is get fireballed. Over the fence comes a blooming Molotov cocktail fireball and landing next to us. And I looked at you and I thought, is he going to run or is he going to stand? And we had a young lady with us as a scriber, and we had another ex-military guy with us as our first group. And I just looked at your face and it didn't affect you at all. And I thought, yeah, he can do the biz. And we went in and dealt with all these people. And if you remember, they locked us in there, the public locked us in, protesters, and they couldn't get a Metropolitan TSG in to support us, and we had to break out ourselves. And it was like the closest thing I've ever seen to Zulu in my life. I'd like to think I was a film star, but it didn't happen like that, did it? They broke in and stole our food, if I remember.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they dug, if I remember, they dug almost...
They dug tunnels.
Tunnels and traps and things like that. It was as close as you could describe as a war zone, really, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. But the thing is, what you've got to realise, in a war zone, you're normally dealing with public that will react because they're emotional. But these people, what you call, once you've got hold of them, they're passive resistant. And that's really dangerous, passive resistant, because we react on body language and communications. They weren't giving that to us. You remember when we got up to get these people, they froze on us. And we couldn't physically move them immediately. We had to make sure if we did remove them, that'd be safely done. And that was quite an education, that was. I remember coming away from that. And also when the team came away from that, what I was talking about earlier, about how people record stuff, the team's on a high because they managed to get the protesters out of the trees. But everybody's listening to what those guys are saying and girls are saying. You only need one person to say one thing wrong. It's in the media next day. And that's why we needed your legal expertise on that. And that's what was the first time we've ever had you on an operation on that. And that was an education to all of us. But it's great to know you've got that legal knowledge with you. Somebody that can practically do the martial arts and assist us. That's a real big bonus for us. You know, I think we're the only company that ever done that, Polearm International.
And aside from the police support as well, because as I remember, there was a group, in fact, they came in 2 coaches, didn't they? civil enforcement officers and the police.
Yep.
There must have been 80 between them.
Yep.
And an area commander from the police unit. And none of the others went in. Only our team went in.
Yeah, because that's because we're stupid.
I mean, at the
That's because we like to get in there. What happens is nothing survives the first contact. Absolutely. What the police had done earlier, they drove by to see if they were still active.
Yeah.
And they
with their sirens on at my house.
And the protesters realised we were coming in.
Yeah.
So they prepared for us. And our biggest job was to try to stop them gaining height.
Yeah.
That was our biggest job. But as you know, we couldn't. And also, once you start climbing and you start apprehending people, you could chase them into a very dangerous situation. And legally and justifiably, you need somebody like yourself on the spot to advise us. It's no good phoning in or trying to deal with it. And you haven't got all those years of knowledge. And once you said, well, we can deal with him, my team would go out and react and get the person. But you've got to remember, in this role, when you're climbing against protesters, they may throw urine down on you that they've saved. Why they do that is because once you get urine on your climbing gear, you have to write it off. Because the errata says you get urine on the climbing harnesses, you have to write it off. But you've got to respect the people for endurance, and they're trying to make this world a better place. And if you treat them with respect, they know it. And if you've got their expertise, you handle them. You've got the physical expertise, and you've got the technical expertise of doing courses and climbing, and the legal expertise. That's when you can make a decision clearly.
So we've talked a bit about polearm and the academy and the training. How is polearm and the training that you get with Polearm Academy different to any other kind of martial arts or any other kind of training?
Basically, the difference between us and a normal martial arts organisation is we start off with the implications legally and physically what's going to happen to get involved in it. So people don't realise you immediately look at the impact factors when you're communicating with somebody. Teaching that is a real education to some people. They walk and took the reins to some real violence. And you think, how can you stay there? Even the way they walk into somebody, the angle they pick when they're walking in. When we communicate in the fighting arc, basically. When I teach people the third part of BD, which is decision, they go to communicate somebody and they go straight into their fighting arc. Now, if they get a vibe that there's something negative about this person, they don't come out of that fighting arc. If they move out of the fighting arc, if the person's got intent, they will move around to assault them. That's indicators that you need, but they still carry ahead. Even when everything says that you're going to come unstuck on this, they will still fight. Also, people are very cautious about withdrawing. If they feel that they're out of their depth, they should withdraw. There's nothing to lose. I mean, the amount of knife crimes that are going on, the amount of people carry blades, you may have a visual of somebody. The impact factors are they're not very big, they don't look scary, they haven't pumped themselves up, but they may be carrying a concealed blade. I've been stabbed more than once by the smallest guy. I was in Kosovo and I was stabbed. And the biggest thing is I went to an American hospital to be treated, and so did the guy that stabbed me. And all my team kept coming in and saying, have you seen the size of the guy that stabbed you? He's minute. He's about 7 stone wet. But it didn't matter. He was concealing a blade and he stabbed me. Now, the indicators were there, but I was so arrogant, I didn't read them. So even when you've been doing it for years, you only need that sudden moment when you haven't got that, you're overconfident and you come unstuck. Well, Polearm was formed. I was employed originally as a trainer for British Transport Police on London Underground. Now, the difference with London Underground is no reactionary gap. The police manual we were using at the time was the Metropolitan Police Manual, and they were talking about personal space, which could be 3 metres. Yeah, public space is 3 metres. Well, you didn't have 3 metres on the Underground. Because of the noise and people, you were working within a metre, so you're in the intimate zone. So myself and our trainers decided we couldn't rely on the manual, so we, as martial artists, because we all served in the military, we decided to form Polearm, and it relies on police and armed forces. The difference of our courses is the guys and girls that teach you have experience of 1, conflict, 2, the repercussions of conflict, justifying your actions. And all this comes into the equation when you decide to get involved in an incident. But people don't teach that in martial art clubs. They just do the actual actions. But everything you do has repercussions, and that's what we teach. So basically, we're not a martial art, we're a combat course where you'll learn how to deal with violence, how to escalate, how to de-escalate, how to communicate, and how to justify. And that's why we came to you, Daniel, in the first place, to sort of bring that expertise to our table.
So what would you say to somebody who might be interested in coming on this course?
Okay, the first course is basically whether you want to carry on with us or whether we want you to carry on. It's not guaranteed you'll go to the next course. Some of the students I don't ask back. I'm very privileged that I can do that. My trainers are all experienced fighters in the martial arts, but also got experience on the battlefield and in some of them in the police as well. But what do you learn on the first courses? Spatial awareness, communications. I quickly idea of how you communicate with somebody, reading what's going on, understanding when you walk into an area what you're looking for, how to look after your family, get an understanding of that. Then we do some quick self-defense techniques, how to break away from somebody trying to engage with you. Don't forget, as soon as you start getting there, you've got to look after your family, how to move your family away from danger, things like that. The first course is basically an intro. You will learn a lot on it, but it's an intro. It brings in a mix of martial arts, from standing and fighting to ground fighting. But the other aspect is we have enough padding and equipment that you can get into fighting. Like the biggest shock I've had is that my old unit, the British Transport Police, have stopped the fitness test. They have stopped the fitness test. Now, as you know yourself, Daniel, fitness is a triangle: knowledge, skill, the baseline is fitness. I broke the world record for running with 40 pounds on my back for the Guinness Book of Records marathon. I did it in under 4 hours, quite easily. But in a street fight, I fight for 3 minutes. I'm exhausted, absolutely exhausted. It's not like these films you see, John Wicks and all that, where they can fight for hours. It doesn't happen. It does not happen. And what we teach on the course, we take them to that extreme on the first course, where they do have combative experience. And they fight 1, then they fight 2, and it's all safely done because they're wearing the padding. But what they find is they lose all their skills as they get weaker. So you come on the first course, the idea is you do the first course, and you can come back on the first course if you want to go proceed to the second one. But you go away from there realising you're not aware. You don't know the legal aspects of it. You're talking yourself into conflicts. You're not moving away when you should. The public look at you and think, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. Also, remember, when the police officer apprehends you, you're immediately, everything you say is going to be recorded. So prior knowledge and how you communicate with the police officers is as important as your basic combat skills.
Now, this might be useful for most people watching. When we see something unfolding in public, so something out of the ordinary unfolding, and someone is deciding whether or not to intervene, to engage, to get involved, what would you say, from all your years of combat experience, what would you say is the most important thing for them to consider at that point?
Well, behavioural detection starts off with observation. We do not observe nowadays. We're so into phones, things like that. We don't observe. Things can be happening and we're walking into train danger. People don't observe that. I worked for Network Rail and other Heathrow, and there are people there that just got no idea what's going on around them. The next thing is assessment, how you assess things. And the final thing is decision. That's when people come unstuck because they get involved in things. They shouldn't be there. They don't look at escape lines. They think it's not going to happen. They don't understand the implications. And that's why we came and spoke to you, and we got you on the army course we were running for the army before going to Afghanistan, these guys, because there's a legal requirement. Everything you do, people are filming it, watching it. You may see, and don't forget, With the Cooper's colour code, you go into red and black, where you have tunnel vision. You don't know what's going on out. But the major public are filming you immediately. It's like when I worked in operations around the world, we had the media going in, and that cameraman, it's like a body armour. That camera was body armour to him. He was behind it, but he was so vulnerable. But as long as he had that photographic stuff in front of him, he didn't care about the bullets coming in. We had to pull them off in certain countries and look after them rather than sorting out our own lads. But the public don't realise so many people video and record what you're doing.
Now, Chris, given the obvious restrictions on what you're permitted to say, how would you summarise your military career?
I came from art school, so I wanted to join the military, but my father said I wouldn't be hard enough or tough enough to join the military. So I came from an art school background. I didn't pass out of art school, I got kicked out for fighting. I was very interested in martial arts at a very young age, but I didn't understand how it would direct me in my life. I joined the Air Force, went into the RAF regiment, and then I eventually ended up as a Sergeant Major in the Royal Marine Commandos. In that time, I worked with the United Nations, worked all around the world teaching close combat, attached to different countries, attached to different people. One of the most interesting things was with the UN Close Protection Team, which are all bodyguards from all different nations. Work as an operator, but also teaching them how to do counteraction when an incident happened, how to get in there. And that's when I realised, and behavioural detection didn't happen until 9/11, when they realised there's so many incidents and indicators that these guys weren't up to good, but nobody could highlight it. And behavioural detection came from the FBI Academy and was transported in this country, and we took it on.
People talk about SAS, SBS and elite forces. What should they know, what should they understand, and what's the difference?
The thing you've got to understand about elite and special forces is the selection process makes you an individual. Although you work as a team, you're predominantly individual and you make the decisions yourself. Everybody thinks you can achieve anything or do anything in the military. You can't. Your rules of engagement are so important. Same as the police officer in this country as well. They have a better understanding of the rules of engagement when they're operating in countries. This applies to places like the UN and other countries. When you're operating overseas, you've got to understand you're also institutionalised by the military. That's the difference. I went to Kosovo with the Commando Brigade, and I was working as patrol taskmaster with the Norwegian elite forces. And then I picked up a contract to work with the UN after it. And I lived in Pristina. And suddenly I was working and operating with the locals. And I realised then just how you're institutionalised when you're in the military. And when you're working as a police officer with the United Nations in these countries, how people view things differently. And we had that in Northern Ireland. You know, every time a unit went to Northern Ireland, military, Army, Air Force or Marines, when you first hit the ground out in Northern Ireland, you're quite aggressive because you've been institutionalised. But in the second or third month, you suddenly realise, you could call it the baseline, how you operate out there. Then you start really operating properly. And of course, then you come to the end of your tour where you're thinking about going home and you start losing a lot of skills. And that's why the terrorists hit you at the end, predominantly at the end of the tour, because you're a bit not so on your guard.
How would you say your military training and background has affected the work that you do today and the courses that we provide today?
What you've got to realise is that real produce that the military trained. I came from art school. I'd done a lot of martial arts before I went to art school. I didn't realise how it would affect my complete life. But giving you an example how the military has changed, I went to a certain unit in the 70s and I used live bayonets for fighting. And we got 4 guys stabbed. Nowadays in the military, that would be a court of inquiry. But nobody blinked an eyelid. They just said that's realistic training. Because Crown had its immunity then. Crown hasn't got its immunity now. We were immune to anything. So we could go to levels and stuff like that. So we did our basics in very violent times. But we didn't have the media coverage. We did not have the media coverage. Every time you go in theatre now, media coverage. Iraq, Afghanistan. Also, You have to sanitise your own guys because they just want to remember what's happening. They take a film and suddenly, as we found out ourselves, it come back and bite you. So the media is a major thing now. I was on one incident where a member of the public refused to get on a train. He kept his feet on the deck, on the platform, and his bum in there. And the member that was working on the platform got the public to remove the person, physically remove the person, which looked great because he got the train moving. But when he went on YouTube, he lost his job a few days later because he used excess force. So if you're doing a martial art course, it's great. Martial arts is martial arts. But what we're teaching, you and me, are streetwise, educating people. My biggest kick in life is developing people. Getting somebody like yourself, although you've got a tremendous background, but getting people that aren't that developed. When we ran that live job in Bath with those students, that was great. I got a real kick out of that because I could see them developing. I'm far from any hero and I'm far from clever, but I just love the development. And watching you train the army, go into operations, and your development is what I get the real kick out of. That's my main thing, not money, not that. But also, the thing we forget about Pole Arm Academy is these veterans come back in and we're a team again. Not just because we've all worked together operationally overseas. It's because we watch these students coming through from all walks of life and we see them developing. And you were one that actually took a chance to come down with us to teach the army. Supposed to do the legal side, but ended up teaching martial arts. And the funniest thing I ever saw was your face when you watched two soldiers in the hall. One put a fist hood on, which is a real sort of armoured hood, and his mate was kicking him as hard as he could in the head. And you went, have you seen this? We're used to that because that's a sort of military mentality from the British Army and the Marines, that gun-ho side. But it's watching your development and how do you have to adapt your training from a system that is very structured rankily by downgrades and cues, things like that, to suddenly realising that none of that means anything. It's all on your skill level if you can take the guys out and such like. And if you remember, we brought in, and because comes from an RAF background, the army thought they could eat him alive. They didn't realise that was a top martial artist. And after he put 3 or 4 down, they all turned him in, don't fight him. And it was that sort of education that you had at the end, how you change your attitude to martial arts or fighting, because these guys want to learn how to fight because they're going to Afghanistan. There's a difference if you're doing it as a sport, that if you do know that your life depends on what you do. And people always think that's a fighting art. It's not. It's the legal aspect. That's just as important. It's great if you survive and you can get court-martialed and you can end up in prison for 8 years. That's awful. So people don't realise. What shocks me is that they go, all these martial art clubs teach self-defence, yet they don't do anything on the legal side or the justification of actions. And that's what we do, thanks to you putting that into the course. The thing you've got to remember about teaching the military is you start reading body language from the first day you get them all in. If you're getting parachute regiment or young Marines, they want to take you out. It's like having green belts in the martial arts, the gunslingers. Their whole item is to take you out, destroy you. The street cred would be incredible. You're up there in front, teaching them how to fight and such. They think, I can handle this guy. And when you start talking to the group of people and you said, right, I'm going to teach you this, and you say that magic word, does anybody want to fight? It goes very silent. And the people that think they can handle themselves, all their colleagues, look at those one people. And it gives you an indicator of who you're going to work on next. I think you had a taste of that, didn't you, on our course?
There was, and there was one moment in particular, because it was just after that, the red man suit and everything else, when they were kicking each other around. Then we were moving on to doing body throws and body weight manipulation, to when you really get in hands-on and you have to handle yourself when someone else is trying to manipulate you. And so we had them in a group. I think you were off in the side room. And so I had the group. And so suddenly, although they knew I was one of the trainers, they knew I was a martial arts so-called expert, but I knew that I had to earn their respect at that point. And so, again, same thing, but looking around, and everyone knows who the big, strong guy is. So I picked the biggest, strongest, well, they're all big and strong, right? They're all taller than me. But I picked the biggest, strongest looking guy to use as the demo, to say, you know, grab me from behind and whatever. And it was the old lift him off his feet and shrug him to the ground. And he hit the ground and the room shook. But it made everyone realize that this stuff works. And so if it worked on him, it's going to work on all of them as well. And so that was a moment, I think, when the dynamics changed.
Yeah, when we started the 1-3 course, the elite fighting and weapons course, then we went on to the 2-3 where they done BDA. Well, I got the shock when they done 3-3 and they're operating as a team. I would not have believed that we could have taken civilians and done that. And it's really pleasant because we live in a world now of people with no belief, no sort of loyalty to anything. These guys were looking after each other massively. They were looking after each other. We through an incident in Bath where the VIP was attacked by 3 people. So the VIP was attacked by 3 people. And I thought, they're never going to cope with this. Out of the blue, the BD team took us out in seconds. None of the public even realised that happened. And I stood back and I thought, crikey, the elite forces and special forces couldn't have done that so professionally. But you've got to remember that those civilians, this is their environment. They lived in this. And we walked away from that. Even the police said they could not believe how efficient. They didn't even see the BD team move in and apprehend us. And they got the VIP away. The VIP didn't even know it happened when they spoke to her. That's how good it was. Where a lot of conventional forces, and elite forces like the Powers and the Marines, predominantly the Powers, would actually confront the person. But they didn't. They moved the team trying to harass that woman so quickly that the personal escort section got her away in no seconds. So that's a real achievement. And the same happened to you. When you come into that, it's baptism by fire, isn't it?
It is.
You can hide behind your belts, you can hide behind all your paperwork, but when you're on the mat, you're on the mat. And that's what we do on our course, as you know, we do on our courses. You will not walk away from the first course like your master. You will walk away from the first course being aware of where your weaknesses are. If you want to go away and develop them, like some people have, the physical fitness, going to different martial art classes, stuff like that, it's great. We've still done our job. But that's what we're trying to achieve. Make you more aware of what's happening in your life and the environment you're getting into. And you've got to remember out there now, it's getting more and more violent. I just done a refresher medics course and the amount of stab wounds I was dealing with was awful. And that's why we've included it in now. And in fact, we do what they call sitting defensive. It's where you can't run away, you can't hide, and you're just trying to make longer to survive. And we teach a thing called sitting defensive, which some people say suicide. But if you're going to get stabbed, at least reduce the stabbing and how to deal with the stab wounds. And that's another thing we teach on the course. Knife first aid or third aid. The thing that might shock you, Daniel, is from that first course, we had one guy on it that you spotted that thought he could handle himself.
Yeah.
And if you remember,
I know him. Yeah.
I started fighting with him. And he had an eureka moment where he realised he was not outclassed, because I'm an old man.
He realised that what you do works.
Yeah, what I do works. He's now becoming a trainer. Now, polearm, apart from yourself, only had one civilian, that was you. I've now, out of that first course, got 4 possible trainers for the future. I thought polearm, sadly, was going to die. It had, you brought it out, and I admire you for that, and your faith. You brought it out. But I thought, you know, Daniel's a busy guy. I have now 4, possibly 5 person that have become polearm trainers. First time ever, I've got guys that have never done anything. They are now become polearm trainers. That's an achievement. That's an amazing achievement.
Really
and to
is.
see that development, how they can talk, they can fight, they can escalate, they can de-escalate, and they can operate. That's a real, I would say that's the best achievement, because I never thought that was going to happen, that you get 4 guys, possibly 5, that have got no instructional training, and yet they are the future of polearm. And that's the biggest shock I've had in the last year.
It's all because of the courses you
First
put them
course,
through? Yeah.
that's that first course. Second course, no. We got 3 from the second course, including your mate. 7 I didn't ask back. Last course got none back because they didn't come from your original thing. They came from martial arts, things like that. But you, if you had told me that first day we had you, me and Mick, and they all arrived and we all thought, oh God, they've really got some. And Mick says to me, he says, you do realise they're going to look at us like old men. I thought, that's a really good starting point, isn't it? Cheers, Mick. He goes, yeah, because we are. You're the youngest one. And you started talking to them legally, get them to sign the forms. And I went, well, that's great. And he goes, yeah, well, we are. These are the young guys. I went, well, cheers, that's really going to start us off well. If you had told me then that apart from you, we'd have 5, possibly, future trainers from polearm, and they're developing polearm. One of them last week came up with the team leadership. Give our experience to corporate companies. And you think, we used to do that. We did that for certain companies. But we forgot about it. But he brought it up, so they're bringing a new, fresh face. And that would be great, and that's an achievement, I think. Watching 5 guys that have never had any military training coming in to become trainers in polearm. I thought that was impossible, but it's showing you it does work.
I was just going to say the most interesting bit of all of that is that they are not who you would expect. You would expect martial arts instructors or those that have had years of martial arts training or police training or military training, or that's what you would expect. That's who you would expect. But it's not. It's those that just, my viewers here, that had just taken an interest from the snippets that I gave away. And that was before we had any real, we didn't have any footage of it.
No.
Now we've got some footage of the course, which I can put on screen. But initially, we had no footage to show. We had nothing to show. It was just me talking about what you do.
We didn't know whether it was going to succeed, did we? We didn't.
No.
We didn't. It was a dream I'd had for years. Didn't know it was going to succeed. Thinking, I'd like to see polearm, because polearm came because the police manual didn't match, wasn't fit for purpose.
Yeah.
And we had to design a programme for London Underground that was that conflict. We couldn't rely on a normal manual. And then to bring a new course in and to see that there is a future now because those guys and girls are bringing something new in. Because you were our first that came into polearm, non-military. And that's amazing, I think, to watch these guys. And they're so passionate. They all meet together now. They're on WhatsApp. It's a real elite club that they've made themselves, not us. And because I didn't have enough students for one course that we're just going to run, they got among themselves and said, we can't let them down, let's go for it. That's priceless, isn't it, that camaraderie? But also the other thing you've got to think of, all these veterans, they feel spent, these veterans, because they used to be sergeants, colour sergeants, staff sergeants. When they throw themselves into polearm, they see the development in these students. And I think they get a bigger kick out of that than they do just basically teaching them. Because when you can tell they all leave on a massive high. And that's where the students leaving on a massive high. And the instructors are a massive high. And there's a humour as well. It's not deep. We're talking about some serious stuff here. People being stabbed, bleeding out. When we hit them on that, and then next moment, they're all laughing around what we're teaching them. So they not only learn the serious side, they learn that humour is a really important thing here, and mending you and stuff like that.
And Chris, finally, if you had one parting word to any student, anyone watching, anyone looking to come on the course, or anyone training or doing anything in general, what would that be?
The biggest thing I think we leave all our students, no matter what your background is, whether you're elite forces or police or stuff like, you're only 30%ers. You can have all the skills in the land, but when it kicks in, if you can get 30% of your training, you're successful. Only in Hollywood does it 100%.
Chris, it's been an absolute pleasure. I'd love to have you on again, and I'm sure my viewers would appreciate that as well. Thank you so much.